The mountain mist clings to your robes as you kneel on the frozen wooden floor of the meditation hall, your breath visible in the pre-dawn darkness. It's 3 a.m., and the bronze bell has just shattered the silence that blankets Mount Koya. Your stomach gnaws with hunger. You haven't eaten since yesterday's single meal at noon. But the growling is nothing compared to the bone-deep cold that penetrates the thin walls of this ancient temple. Around you, 30 other monks sit in perfect stillness, their shaved heads bowed in meditation. One novice sways slightly from exhaustion and immediately receives a sharp crack across the shoulders from the wooden stick wielded by the meditation master. There are no exceptions, no mercy for weakness. You've been awake for 22 hours straight, and you still have 16 hours of rituals, labor, and study ahead of you before you can collapse onto your straw mat for a few precious hours of sleep. This isn't a retreat or a spiritual vacation. This is your life as a Buddhist monk in the mountains of Edo, Japan, where enlightenment comes through systematic destruction of physical comfort, where a single misstep in ritual can result in violent punishment, and where the politics between different temple factions can be more deadly than any samurai battlefield. Today, we're climbing into the harsh world of Buddhist monasteries in Edo, Japan, where spiritual seeking meant surviving brutal mountain winters with minimal food, where monks wielded both prayer beads and weapons, where temple hierarchies created their own forms of oppression, and where the pursuit of enlightenment required enduring conditions designed to break the human spirit. Introduction. Buddhism arrived in Japan in the year 552 CE through Korean monks who carried not just religious texts, but an entire worldview that would reshape Japanese society. Prince Shotoku championed Buddhism in the early 7th century, but it took centuries for the religion to fully integrate with native Shinto and establish the powerful institutional presence that defined the Edo period. By the time the Tokugawa shogunate established control in 1603, Buddhism had become the de facto state religion through the temple registration system. Every Japanese citizen was required to register with a Buddhist temple, creating a nationwide surveillance network that served both spiritual and political purposes. This system generated enormous wealth and influence for major temples, but also placed them under strict government control. Mountain monasteries like those on Mount Fuji, Mount Koya, Mount Hiei, and countless smaller peaks throughout Japan became centers of learning, political intrigue, and extreme ascetic practice. The major Buddhist sects, Tendai, Shingon, Zen, Jodoshu, each developed distinct monastic traditions unified by rigorous daily schedules, hierarchical social structures, and the constant tension between spiritual ideals and worldly necessities. The monk-soldier tradition meant that many monasteries maintained armed forces, creating environments where monks navigated complex relationships between enlightenment seeking and institutional survival through violence when necessary. Chapter 1. The Mountain Fortress. In 1687, the monk Enkai recorded his arrival at a remote Shingon monastery on Mount Omine, describing how the 3-day climb through an unmarked forest path was deliberately designed to test the commitment of prospective monks. Those who turned back were considered unworthy of Buddhist training, while those who persevered often arrived half-dead from exhaustion and exposure. The physical environment of mountain monasteries represented the first and most constant challenge facing monks who sought enlightenment through systematic deprivation and hardship. Temple architecture prioritized spiritual function over human comfort. The main hall, meditation hall, and living quarters provided minimal insulation against mountain weather. Individual cells had no heating, while the single irori in the main gathering area served dozens of monks. Water sources required daily maintenance, and often froze during winter months. Monks hauled water up treacherous mountain paths from distant springs, breaking ice and carrying supplies in all weather conditions. During extreme cold, every drop had to be rationed carefully. Food storage presented constant challenges where transportation was difficult and weather unpredictable. Kura held rice and preserved vegetables, but supplies could run dangerously low during severe winters or when political conflicts disrupted trade relationships. Defensive features reflected the reality that even remote monasteries faced threats from bandits, rival sects, or political enemies. Walls, gates, watchtowers, and hidden weapons caches were standard, while escape routes through mountain terrain provided last resort options. Agricultural terraces carved into mountainsides required back-breaking labor to maintain. Monks spent countless hours terracing steep slopes and creating irrigation systems that could survive mountain weather extremes, producing barely enough food for basic survival. Chapter 2: The Daily Ordeal. In 1654, a Dutch physician visiting Mount Koya recorded his amazement at witnessing monks who had been awake for over 20 hours still performing complex rituals with perfect precision. Their movements so synchronized they appeared controlled by a single mind rather than individual will. The monastic daily schedule represented a carefully orchestrated system designed to break down individual ego through exhaustion, repetition, and collective discipline. Morning bell rang at 3 a.m., beginning a day that wouldn't end until after 11 p.m. Monks rose immediately regardless of weather, illness, or exhaustion, beginning with morning ablutions using cold mountain water even when ice had to be broken first. Meditation periods, zazen, lasted 2 to 4 hours in unheated halls where maintaining proper posture became a struggle against cold, hunger, and fatigue. The meditation master carried a wooden staff to strike monks who showed drowsiness or improper form. Sutra chanting sessions involved memorizing thousands of lines of Buddhist texts in ancient Chinese and Sanskrit. Perfect pronunciation, timing, and coordination with temple bells and drums were required, with mistakes resulting in punishment and public shame. Begging rounds sent monks down mountain paths to nearby villages, collecting rice, vegetables, and coins. These expeditions took entire days, involving walking dozens of miles in all weather while maintaining meditative mindfulness. Temple maintenance included sweeping, cleaning, repairing buildings, tending gardens, and chopping firewood. This work was considered spiritual practice equal to meditation or sutra study. The single daily meal had to be prepared by monks working in rotation, served in ritual silence, and consumed with gratitude regardless of quality or quantity. Sleep allocation rarely exceeded 4 hours, often less during intensive training periods or special ceremonies. Chapter 3: The Hierarchy of Suffering. In 1701, the Tengu Rebellion at Daigoji Temple resulted in violent conflicts between monastic factions that left several monks dead and forced government military intervention. The dispute originated from succession disagreements for the head abbot position, demonstrating how monastery politics could explode into deadly confrontations. The monastic hierarchy created complex power structures that determined every aspect of monastery life and individual monk experiences within these isolated communities. The abbot wielded absolute authority, combining spiritual leadership with economic management and political representation. These positions were often inherited or purchased through substantial donations, making spiritual qualifications secondary to wealth and connections. Senior monks controlled specific departments: temple finances, ritual performance, novice training, and external relations. Competition for these positions created factional conflicts that could persist for decades and occasionally erupted into violence. Discipline masters, enforced monastic rules through physical punishment and public humiliation, carrying wooden staffs and rope restraints used liberally on monks who violated regulations or failed to meet performance standards. Novices occupied the lowest status and faced constant abuse from higher-ranking monks. They performed the most unpleasant tasks, received the smallest food portions, and endured harsh treatment designed to test their commitment to monastic life. Lay brothers served without full monastic vows, handling practical matters while maintaining intermediate status that created tensions with both ordained monks and outside communities. Patron relationships with wealthy families and local daimyo determined monastery resources and political protection. Senior monks spent considerable time cultivating these relationships through visits and ceremonies that often contradicted Buddhist principles of detachment from worldly concerns. Chapter 4. Winter's Deadly Embrace. In 1738, a catastrophic winter storm trapped the monks of Zenkoji Temple for 47 days. They survived by eating bark, roots, and eventually leather from their sandals. When rescue parties finally reached the monastery, 18 monks had died from starvation and cold, while survivors had melted snow with their own body heat because all fuel was exhausted. Winter in mountain monasteries represented the ultimate test of monastic endurance, where survival required extraordinary measures, and many monks died from exposure, starvation, or exhaustion. Fuel management became critical as temperatures dropped. Collecting firewood required daily expeditions into dangerous terrain, while rationing fuel meant choosing between cooking food and providing minimal heat for essential activities. Food preservation techniques included smoking, salting, and storing vegetables in underground pits that remained frozen throughout winter. Miso paste, pickled vegetables, and dried fish provided essential nutrients, but quantities were often inadequate. Clothing adaptations relied on layering thin cotton and hemp garments rather than warm fabrics that violated monastic rules. Monks wrapped straw around their feet inside wooden geta sandals and used rice paper to line their robes, but these measures provided minimal protection. Medical challenges multiplied when respiratory infections, frostbite, and malnutrition weakened communities. Traditional medicine knowledge became essential, with senior monks treating conditions from hypothermia to scurvy using limited resources. Emergency protocols for severe weather included rationing systems and procedures for sending rescue parties to nearby villages when supplies ran critically low. Deaths during winter occurred frequently enough that monasteries maintained procedures for storing bodies until spring thaw allowed proper burial ceremonies. Chapter 5. Politics of the Sacred. In 1571, Oda Nobunaga ordered the complete destruction of Enryaku temple complex on Mount Hiei, massacring over 3,000 monks. The attack was motivated by the monastery's political opposition and its warrior monk armies that threatened Nobunaga's power consolidation. The intersection of spiritual practice and political power created environments where Buddhist monasteries became centers of violence and intrigue that often overshadowed their religious functions. Warrior monk traditions developed when monasteries needed to defend extensive landholdings against rival temples, local daimyo, and government interference. These armed monks received military training alongside religious instruction, creating hybrid identities combining spiritual discipline with combat skills. Territorial disputes between different Buddhist sects regularly erupted into armed conflicts lasting years. The rivalry between Tendai and Nichiren temples was particularly violent, with raids, assassinations, and pitched battles occurring throughout the medieval and early modern periods. Government surveillance through the temple registration system placed monasteries under constant pressure to serve state interests. Monks were expected to report suspicious activities, enforce government policies, and suppress activities threatening Tokugawa authority. Alliance networks connected monasteries with specific daimyo families, creating obligations to provide military support and intelligence during political conflicts. These relationships compromised monastic independence while drawing monks into violent confrontations, contradicting Buddhist principles. Rebellions and uprisings often centered on Buddhist institutions with grievances against government policies. The Shimabara Rebellion involved Buddhist communities, while numerous smaller uprisings originated in monastery-led resistance to taxation or political control. Chapter 6. The Search for Enlightenment. In 1758, the monk Hakuin Ekaku recorded achieving Satori after 7 years of intensive meditation, during which he slept less than 3 hours nightly, ate only enough to prevent death, and subjected himself to physical hardships that permanently damaged his health. Yet he described enlightenment as worth all suffering because it revealed the illusory nature of physical pain. The pursuit of spiritual awakening in mountain monasteries required extreme methods that pushed human endurance beyond normal limits, while navigating tensions between authentic seeking and institutional demands. Meditation practices varied by Buddhist sect, but universally involved systematic attempts to transcend normal consciousness. Zazen meditation sessions lasted 4 to 8 hours with minimal breaks for movement or position adjustment. Sutra memorization required monks to perfectly recite thousands of lines in ancient Chinese and Sanskrit languages they often didn't understand. This practice was believed to create spiritual transformation through repetitive exposure to sacred concepts. Ascetic practices included deliberate starvation, exposure to extreme weather, sleep deprivation, and self-inflicted discomfort designed to weaken attachment to physical pleasure and demonstrate commitment to spiritual development over bodily welfare. Walking meditation involved traversing mountain paths while maintaining meditative awareness, covering enormous distances in challenging terrain while reciting mantras. These journeys lasted weeks and involved sleeping outdoors in all weather. Koan study in Zen monasteries presented monks with paradoxical questions designed to exhaust rational thinking and trigger intuitive breakthrough experiences. Students spent years contemplating single koans under intense pressure. Master-disciple relationships created intimate bonds requiring complete obedience and submission to teaching methods that often seemed cruel, but were designed to destroy ego attachments and facilitate spiritual breakthrough. Solitary retreats isolated monks in mountain caves for months or years, surviving on minimal resources while engaging in intensive practices without external support. Conclusion. The daily life of Buddhist monks in mountain monasteries reveals a world where the highest spiritual aspirations coexisted with brutal physical conditions, institutional corruption, and systematic violence that often contradicted the very principles these communities claim to embody. Yet within this harsh environment, some individuals achieved genuine spiritual breakthrough and maintained authentic practice despite overwhelming pressures to compromise their ideals. The mountain monasteries of Edo, Japan created extreme conditions that stripped away illusions about comfortable spirituality, while demonstrating that human dignity and spiritual aspiration could survive even the most challenging circumstances. The monks who endured these conditions, whether they achieved enlightenment or simply survived, preserved Buddhist teachings that continue to influence spiritual seekers today. Perhaps most significantly, their experiences reveal the eternal tension between spiritual ideals and institutional realities that affects religious communities across cultures and centuries. The contradictions and occasional triumphs of these mountain monks remind us that the search for meaning and transcendence persists, even when the systems meant to support it become corrupted by power, violence, and human frailty. The next time you encounter claims about easy paths to enlightenment or comfortable spirituality, remember the monks of Edo, Japan's mountain monasteries who discovered that genuine transformation requires confronting the full complexity of human nature, including its capacity for both profound wisdom and devastating cruelty. Thanks for watching the final chapter of our survival series on the brutal reality of life in feudal Japan. Next, we're shifting perspectives entirely. Our new series explores the beauty, philosophy, and artistry that blossomed from Japanese civilization, the traditions that endured through centuries and still shape the world today. We'll journey into the Zen principles that guided the warrior's mind, the meditative grace of the tea ceremony, the quiet wisdom of wabi-sabi, the spiritual rhythm of calligraphy, and the poetry that captured the soul of an era. These aren't just cultural traditions. They're windows into how the Japanese people found meaning, peace, and transcendence, even in their harshest times. Stay tuned.